Dr. Tariba, you were speaking to what the budget and the president's New Year Day speech says about this administration's financial and economic vision.
Right. I was saying that this president's speech, in acknowledging the difficulties that the nation has had to grapple with, should resonate with the majority of Nigerians. In particular, the post-unification experience with the exchange rates, in which we've seen a lot of volatility and we've seen a lot of weakening in the value of the naira, both in the official window and in the parallel market window, some of which has, fed through into pump price being higher, into living costs, particularly food costs and energy costs, and is bringing, more intensity to the debate about the need to remove remaining subsidies on electricity and gas. But the direction of the budget shows that the government is making fairly adequate provisions for the mitigation of the adverse effects of these reforms on living costs. Government keeps finding more and more revenue, and the president had proposed 18 trillion in revenue, which is a big departure from the peak of 7 trillion revenue that we achieved under President Buhari. And the Senate has jacked it up with about the same amount as they increased the spending. They jacked the revenue up, putting a lot more MBAs under pressure to improve their revenue performance. That will ensure that much of the promises made by the government to ameliorate the hardships of Nigerians will be kept. That level of funding, 19.2 trillion, should at least cover the current headings and cover all the current headings, including debt and non-debt items, leaving capital project funding as the major gap in the budget, because the spending is about 9 trillion higher than the expenditure, and that 9 trillion that you have to finance might be the one, for the capital spending. But the government is saying a lot of things about wanting to give opportunities to domestic investors, foreign investors, diaspora, and PPP counterparts to come and bring the money that will close that gap, rather than wanting to borrow, rather than adding to debt. And I think that's the right thing to say.
And Dr. Tariba, apologies for butting in. Because what you're saying is really packed with a lot of interesting points, and I really want us to take time to break them down one after the other. You've talked about revenue, you've talked about what the government is saying, and you've also mentioned the capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. But I want to start with what the government is saying and what their body language seems to be like. Because one of the packages or reports that we took just a minute ago, one of the respondents said, and I'm quoting him, I have been hearing this, for a while now, until I see it and I touch it. And so that's how a lot of some Nigerians feel, who think that, look, we've heard this a lot of times. Does it look like this government has a plan just beyond the promises?
Okay. Remember that Nigeria's hardship began second half of 2014. So since 2015, we have had government for 8 years in a row announce budgets that they will fail to fund, particularly the capital project element, which painfully is the one that touches on infrastructure. And the year that just ended is not different. As of September, government had only spent 25% on what they had planned to spend on infrastructure. You have you can't not but pay wages, you cannot but pay interest. So the component that has been neglected in 8 years has been the capital spending component, in which big figures will be allocated on paper when the budget is signed, but at the end of the year, they will not be funded. So Nigerians are used to that. So if they are, skeptical, they have strong reasons to be skeptical. And that is what the new administration need to prove wrong. That this time, they are not planning to borrow to fund the capital spending. They are planning to give opportunities to investors. And the sooner they begin to take actions that convince us that, yes, truly, they are opening opportunities for investors. So if you want to attract domestic direct investors, what assets are you offering them? When exactly are you going to open the bid? Are you selling a percentage of some of the companies that are equity in companies that you own? Are you inviting them to come and invest in real estate development? Many of our idle real estate, National Stadium is there. You can earn revenue for the government. It is earning nothing. And, land has multiple uses. You have a lot of barracks. I won't use the space where Bonicam sits on today as a barrack. There are a lot of other things that you earn 1,000 times what you are recovering from using that place as a barrack. If you compare it with the Atlantic City next to it, the Keja Cantonment, I won't continue to use as a barrack, given the number of five-star hotels that is in the Keja GRA next to it. So government needs to be specific. I'm not sure that those specificity are yet in the budget. And if you are talking about attracting investment into infrastructure, which ones, when? And unless they say more about these in the course of the first quarter of the year, we may miss the opportunity, Buhari promised us that NNPC will be listed in the stock exchange, but they kept shifting the date. And to date, NNPC is not listed in any stock exchange. No government-owned company is listed in any stock exchange. And we will benefit if we could ascertain the market value of those companies, would be my response. So I'm not skeptical. I am urging, very much like a fan, watching a match, and there's, no, let them, put in a striker, let them do this, let them do that, let them defend better.
So if I hear you clearly, Dr. Teriba, we need to be more specific. It's about putting a time frame. What is a short-term, long-term, mid-term, and long-term plan? Just that the specifics has to be there. But I also wanted to talk about, because you mentioned the issue of revenue. We know that there was a revenue shortfall last year. Where do we find the money this time? Is the fuel subsidy removal enough? We're also trying to improve on our local refining capacity with the Port Harcourt refinery and Dangote refinery. Is that also enough? Where do we find the money?
The unification of the exchange rate that enables the government to recover market rates on each dollar they sell, perhaps is the most important revenue reform, is the biggest leakage. Remember, everybody who was getting the subsidized rate, was doing so at the expense of the country. And it included those who were importing the refined products. So not giving them access to cheap forex, when everybody else is buying at the prime market rate, is the real subsidy removal. And that's what is impacting the revenue improvements. The revenue per month from January to July was 700 billion. And between August and September, it rose to about 1.8 trillion per month. And that's the only reason why we are hoping that next year government will be able to get 18 trillion, 19 trillion, which is going to be a record, And that will only go as far as funding recurrent headaches. These things we are saying about funding capital projects of any kind is unlikely to be covered by that revenue. And that's why you need to, so what you were funding with debt before, you now need to fund with equity. And that's why you need some specificity from the government about what they are offering to attract the equity. Equity is a sale and purchase transaction. If you offer an asset that you say, I want to sell 2% of it for so much, you will get an uptaker eventually. Unlike that you are just going, cap in hand, begging, and a beggar has no choice. They give you, but an equity seller has choices, can dictate terms, as we did with the GSM companies, as we did with the LNG companies. The rail is there. Open it up. Do it exactly the way you did telecoms. The power transmission is there. Do it the same way. Gas pipelines, fiber optic cables connecting the entire country. Offer them to investors. When you offered GSM, they came. When you offered LNG, they came. So when are we going to start? And then the real estate is even easier. You can put real estate assets down, of which we have thousands. The police real estate, all the night posts, Nitel, former PSTN real estate, all the military holdings all over the country, which are idle. So you can do those in the short time. There's no need, to be spending years to do those. And if you want to take Kenya is taking 35 companies to the markets through IPOs, you do that in months. You don't need years to do that. So Nigeria is sitting on valuable assets that we are getting no money from, and the government is saying they want to turn to those assets. We need to see them actually, turning into that.
And just if you can answer this for me in a minute, because that's the much time I have left, just a minute. I wanted to talk about the idea of increasing minimum wage and how much would be enough. Some have said, look, if you increase it too much, there's a worry about inflation and how to balance that as well. I just wanted to speak to that.
I do think that the key problem that we should try to solve is stabilize the exchange rate. That's what is killing the Nigerian economy. If the exchange rate had been at 160 to the dollar, where President Buhari met it, the minimum wage, 30,000 naira, would be compared to 1,000. The exchange rate is 1,000 naira now. That 30,000 naira would be worth 5 times its value. It would be $150, not $30. So if you are raising the naira wage rate, but the exchange rate keeps tumbling, you have done no job. So get the reserves to stabilize the exchange rate. In 2017, the exchange rate went to 510 before we then stabilized it back to 360, and it stayed there for 3 years until COVID pressures, brought another round of. So are we saying that we've departed from the 500 naira per dollar that we have had because of these short-term, shortfalls in forex? We should be saying that we want to get the reserve to bring the exchange rate back to more tolerable levels. You don't have to solve the 50 problems that the exchange rate has created. Find up the exchange rate and you will solve 50 problems simultaneously. All the debate about subsidy, about electricity tariff, living costs will be solved if you have, a strong naira. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayateriba. Just a lot to talk about, but I'm sure that, as the year progresses and we'll see how this budget is implemented, vis-a-vis the promises of the president, we'll continue to have this conversation with you. CEO, Economic Associate, Dr. Ayateriba, always a pleasure.